because their peacekeepers on the ground would face retaliation. Clinton's national security advisor, Anthony Lake, told us the president's hands were tied.
They were, to put it mildly, extremely reluctant to see us pursue unilaterally any actions which could imperil their troops.
The question then is, why didn't the U.S. lead from the front? Why? You were the superpower, you had already made statements. Why didn't you lead and convince them?
Well, we tried to convince them, and the Europeans said absolutely no.
April 1993. 3 months into the new administration, the opening of the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington.
Mr. President, I cannot not tell you something.
Nobel laureate and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel publicly and personally challenged Clinton to intervene in Bosnia.
As a Jew, I am saying that. We must do something to stop the bloodshed in that country.
I nudged him. I nudged him.
And he promised you that something would happen?
Look, I tried everything.
But Clinton's actions were a far cry from his campaign pledge. Over the next year, he convinced European allies to use limited airstrikes against the Bosnian Serbs. But it did not stop the killing.
Mr. President,
at a 1994 news conference, I asked President Clinton about his get tough words.
The governments did not react. Countries don't defend human rights. They're always subservient to politics.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
The inauguration of President Jimmy Carter in January 1977 promised a change.
So help me God.
Carter vowed to put human rights at the center of U.S. foreign policy. But it would take 15 months for him to publicly condemn the Khmer Rouge as the world's worst violator of human rights. But he took no action to stop the slaughter in Cambodia. Invasion, he says, was not an option.
There was a strong nationwide aversion to the United States being a combatant again in this remote part of Asia.
Instead, in December 1978, Vietnam invaded Cambodia, fed up after years of cross-border skirmishes. The Vietnamese quickly overthrew the Khmer Rouge, who fled back into the jungle. Now the world could finally see that everything François Panchaud had said was true. More than 2 million Cambodians were dead. The scope of the catastrophe quickly became clear, and in the fall of 1979, President Carter responded.
We raised $32 million in special funds to alleviate the plight of the Cambodian refugees.
But the end of Cambodia's nightmare was the beginning of a diplomatic problem for the United States, one that would test an American president's commitment to human rights. The U.S. faced a tough choice. Who should occupy Cambodia's seat at the United Nations? The Khmer Rouge already held it. Cambodia's new leaders also claimed the seat, but they were supported by Vietnam and the Soviet Union, America's Cold War enemies.
I finally decided that we should maintain the status quo because that was the primary desire of all the surrounding nations.
The U.S. and 70 other nations voted for the Khmer Rouge, a genocidal regime that had killed a quarter of its own people. Today, Father François Panchaud is back in Cambodia tending his flock, but this time with no illusions.
Personne ne défend les droits de l'homme.
No one defends human rights.
Les gouvernements sont des monstres.
Governments are cold beasts looking out for their own interests.
When we return,
I said we have to do something.
What makes a person take a stand, even when nobody's listening?
I actually witnessed it. I was there.